Hello, Canada. Hello, United States of America. Greetings to every single one of you all over Costa Rica and the planet. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show that runs every single Tuesday and Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. That's right. Toronto, New York, Miami, Atlanta, in that particular region, 9 p.m., 7 p.m. here in Costa Rica and Mountain Time. We are always thrilled to have the best guests in the world on our show. Tonight, we've got former Member of Parliament Rob Anders. This is part 2 of Trudeau killing the banks. That's right. We have a lot of information to cover here about how Parliament works and how the banks work. My only anecdotal tale for tonight, everybody, is that here in Costa Rica, our good friend Ed and myself, we went driving all over Costa Rica looking at airports, all these hidden gem airports all over the country. And we came across a farmer who invited us onto his land and decided to show us what a yucca was. I've never heard of yucca before, but this guy literally found a tree that was about 6 feet tall, started digging with his hands, and pulls up what looks like a half potato, half carrot combination, 27 inches long, 6 inches thick. This thing was absolutely unbelievable. He says, this thing cooks and tastes like potato. All right. So we took it and we sliced it up. This is what yucca looks like when you barbecue it. There you go, everybody. And if you want to know what yucca tastes like when you barbecue it with a bit of olive oil on top, home fries, like the best home fries Canada and America has to offer. So that is going to be my meal after the show tonight, is more yucca with cayenne pepper, sea salt, and probably a little bit of spicy ketchup, because down here in Costa Rica, one of the most popular things to do is mix hot peppers into ketchup. And by my own admission, I love the stuff. Although when you read the ingredients, unfortunately, a lot of it has MSG. Something I do have to warn everybody about. If you're buying canned food in Costa Rica, read the labels, because MSG shows up more than it should. It's almost like Canada back in the 70s when everything had lead paint and MSG. Well, it's like that here now. If you want to avoid MSG, just buy vegetables, fruits, and meat, and forget the canned goods. By the way, Doritos are here, and I have yet to buy a single bag because Doritos are 3,700 colones, which is about $12 Canadian a bag. Yeah, it's about $12 for a bag of Doritos. No, thank you. So I have not had a single bag of Doritos in 5 months, which is probably better for me, obviously. There's your anecdotal tale for the night. We have Rob Anders in the house, everybody, former Member of Parliament, someone that I guess, unfortunately, from his standpoint, has been within 5 feet distance of jihadi Justin Trudeau. Rob, thanks for coming back. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. So for those of you who are watching on TikTok tonight, I know that you're not going to see Rob, but you're absolutely going to hear him. If you decide that you want to see the show, just head on over to freedomreport.ca, and that is where you will see Rob's lovely face. So last time we spoke, Rob, we were talking about Trudeau crashing the bank system through inaction, actually not through action. And what we had discussed is that the Bank Act of Canada is going to expire next year, and he's just not going to renew it. So let's talk about the Bank Act. Let's get a redefinition of what that is, and then we're going to really dive into this. Please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so the Bank Act dates back to 1871. We had a precursor of that. There was a beginning of the Bank Act in 1869, but it was created a new regime in 71. Anyhow, so it's been there for over 150 years. And they've, in past, they've allowed for every 5 years, maybe every 10 years to have a regulatory review, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But this time, Mr. Trudeau has actually inserted an expiry date of June 30th, 2025. So I think it's at 14 months away now. Last month I used to say it was 15 months away. So in 14 months from now, all of the major federal chartered banks, CIBC, Toronto Dominion, Bank of Nova Scotia, Bank of Montreal, etc., they'll all lose their charters. Okay. And you say, well, what's that all about? Why is that happening? Well, it's all about the central bank digital currency stuff. And so literally, if those banks lose their charter, then in a sense, the Bank of Canada takes over. And that means that they have this situation where they can track all purchases instantaneously. Like right now, say for example, if I use my Alberta Treasury Branch card, then the ATB knows if I've bought gasoline or fuel or whatever. And they might have to settle up at the end of the day or the week or the month, with other banks if they owe them some money or vice versa, etc. But they don't have to report those individual transactions, my transactions, to the Bank of Canada or to the Alberta government in the case of a provincially regulated financial institution. But if you have a scenario where there's a central bank digital currency, then it's the Bank of Canada that tracks all of that stuff instantaneously. Now, that also means that the Canada Revenue Agency looks at something and says, well, we think there's a discrepancy between what you declare and what you purchase. Then all of a sudden they can just go ahead and assess you an extra $10,000 or whatever it is in taxes. And you actually have very little recourse because, of course, it's their currency and they instantaneously control it. They can do automatic withdrawals from your account. Furthermore, they can cause a redistribution and they can set expiry dates. The Chinese digital yuan has expiry dates, and they tell people what they want them to invest in, and if they don't, then their money's no good. So that's what it's based on. A couple other things I want to talk about because I don't think we had a chance to address it last time was, in the States they have the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, and Canada has kind of an equivalent situation. What the banks have done, what the government is allowed for, is what's known as a bail-in. So previously, if a bank was in trouble, there would be a bailout. And that means that the federal government would help them out and give them some liquidity or what they needed to get them through the situation without the bank going belly up. Now, they chose not to do that in the case of some banks during the 2008-2009 crisis they had with Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. And there were a couple of banks that went down, sometimes the ones that people didn't think would go down, but nonetheless. And obviously there's some recent bank failures like in Silicon Valley and stuff like that. But now, as of March 20th in the United States, so it's already a few days past now, a week or so past, that's no longer the case. Now it's a bail-in. So say, for example, you have $300,000 in savings, earning some interest, 5%, 5.1, whatever it would be, with one of the banks. Now, if that bank has trouble, then what happens is your savings get sucked up and used to cover off the liabilities, to cover off the bad assets on the bank before anything happens with the federal government coming for a bailout. So first off, they use the creditors or they use the depositors' stuff to cover off their difficulties. So now I watched an interesting discussion, which I'll subsequently be sending around to all the people I have on my email list. It was a fascinating discussion about some of those higher ups within the banking system saying, well, how much does the market understand this? And do we want the market to understand this? And it was very clear from the discussion I heard that they, didn't think it was important that the market necessarily understood it and didn't want the market to broadly understand it because it would, quote unquote, scare people away from putting those large deposits inside the banks because it no longer becomes your money, it's their money that they can use. I want to point out as well that, some people think that the Canadian system was particularly resilient during the 2007-2008 debacle with subprime mortgages. But that's not entirely the case. What wound up happening was that Stephen Harper, as the Prime Minister, had a good relationship, if you want to call it that, with Mark Carney, who was the governor of the Bank of Canada at the time. What happened was, quietly behind the scenes, the Bank of Canada bought a bunch of bad debt, a bunch of liabilities, took the bad assets off of the balance sheets for some of the banks. We had banks in Canada that were heavily overexposed to both the American and Mexican subprime crisis, but it didn't look that way to the public because some of those bad debts were taken off the sheet. So we would have had banks in Canada that could have just as easily failed as some did in the United States. Now, you imagine how bad the scenario is now, where the federal the FDIC has taken off that bailout provision. Canada is following suit. You've now got depositors, in a sense, that are holding the bag on this stuff, where they're $300,000 or whatever they've got in various instruments can be seized. It's a nasty scenario, and the budget in upcoming here in April in Canada is going to have all of these various mechanisms for central bank digital currencies and whatnot embedded inside the budget.
Okay, so that's a lot you've just covered there. I want to
Yes,
break
sir.
it down a little bit here, and I want to say thank you to everyone who's joining me for the first time over here on TikTok. My name is Kevin J. Johnston, Canada's #1 podcaster, biggest mouth, obviously, and I've had to escape to Costa Rica here to get away from the Canadian government, specifically to be able to podcast and not have the police kicking down my door. This is Rob Anders, who is a former member of parliament. He's been this close to Justin Trudeau. I feel so sorry for him about that. But Rob is also a banking and finance expert. And we're talking about the Bank Act being dissolved next year in Canada. So we get this. If Canada switches to the central bank digital currency, they will know everything you purchase up to the minute.
Correct.
It's a bad scene. Now, yes, you can argue that if you tap your credit card or your bank card, they know as well. But they still have. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to point out the clear distinction there. So whether it's an Alberta Treasury Branch card, which I would hold, okay, or whether or not it's Visa, it's MasterCard held through into the charter banks, etc., they are not obligated to reveal that information to the federal government, to the Bank Act, or to the Bank of Canada in live time, okay, or in anything. Like they have to square up their balance sheet with other banks at the end of the day to make sure that they're not out. Okay.
Right.
But that's a macro number. It's not a micro number with regard to me or you specifically. But with the Bank of Canada and issuing a central bank digital currency, they will instantaneously have all of that information.
Yes. So what I was going to say is that they can find record of everything you spent on your credit card or your bank card, but they need a court order or a warrant to do so. So it's not like it's going to be shared instantaneously. They have to work. The police will have to work, and they have to have justifiable cause in which to do so. But you are correct to say that if the Bank of Canada has a central bank digital currency, yeah, they'll just divulge that list to anybody who wants it. And they'll use it to screw us. I agree with that as well.
It's all about control and power. Yeah.
Absolutely it is. And my biggest fear with a central bank digital currency is the fact that they can have it operate like a coupon as opposed to a currency, which has an expiration date. So I know that in China, you get 6 months to spend your coins. That is all that you get, 6 months. And if you don't spend it, it expires, and that's it, because you can't save it. So what I would have to tell people is if you do get into the central bank digital currency in Canada, buy gold and silver with it right away, because at least then you can save something. All right, just buy gold and silver right away. Right. Don't think that it's going to have any value in the future, because they'll shut it off. If you don't get, there's like more needles, they're going to measles. They want you to get needles for measles now. You don't get them, they're shutting off your money. All right.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to also illustrate something with regard to the Bank Act, because I realize that, a lot of branch managers, they're concerned with mortgages, etc. The only people in the banks that are maybe even paying attention to this are the people who deal with government relations in either Toronto or Ottawa type of thing. But I want to tell you why they've chosen June 30th. The House of Commons usually breaks around June 15th, middle of June. It starts to get hot and muggy. There's not adequate air conditioning. They're wearing wool suits. They want to get back to Canada Day on July 1st to their ridings, etc. So they usually break about June 15th. The Senate might stay for another week just to, tidy up loose business that comes out of the House to get it passed in the Senate so it can receive royal assent and have the Governor General give it royal assent, etc. So by the time you get to June 30th, there's nobody. There's no MPs, there's no senators, there's no parliamentary oversight. Now, the reason they set June 30th is because that way they have the end of June, June 30th, they have all of July, they have all of August, and they probably have all of September for 3 months where there is no parliamentary oversight with regard to whatever the cabinet or the government chooses to do with the Bank Act, from June 30th until September, or maybe even early October, when the House begins to sit again. That allows them a lot of leeway with regard to what they can get away with without having any senators or MPs in session in Ottawa.
So because it gets a little too hot, everyone gets a couple of months off, and with no Senate, no anybody there, Trudeau could actually just pass this if he wanted to pass it. Nobody could stop him.
Well, he's already got it. It's already in law. This was already passed. I suspect what they did is they put it in as part of an omnibus package that would have come in probably leading into a summer break, and they make what they call housekeeping amendments, which often are not just housekeeping, but that's how they sneak it in. And so they slip in a bunch of these things. MPs and senators want to get home. They're tired. It's a long parliamentary session for the spring session. So they put this stuff in. They've already got it. They've already got what they need. It's the Bank Act already has an expiration date. It's already set. The question is how the Canadian public and the banks would react. But if there's no parliamentary oversight for all of July, all of August, and probably most of September next year, it gives the government a tremendous amount of leeway with regard to what they can do after the Bank Act has expired.
Okay. I'm going to recap what you just said, because it sounds like this is actually the perfect scenario for Justin Trudeau, who is a traitor. He's committed high treason over and over again. The Bank Act expires because it's 100 years old. And that what the date you said is June 30th?
June 30th, 2025.
June 30th of next year, it expires.
Correct.
All Justin Trudeau has to do to make sure that Canadians get screwed is just nothing. He just lets it expire and writes no new Bank Act to replace it. Just do nothing, and the banks lose their charter.
That's right. Right now, this is set in course. They need to do nothing else to have the federally chartered banks collapse and for the Bank of Canada to take over some of those duties, like, say, for example, the currency, CBDCs. They don't need to do a damn thing right now. It's already set. The question now is whether or not we, can try to change the expiry date of the Bank Act so they push it later, or B, have an election to get rid of them and have Pierre Poilievre or somebody come in to reset that, or C, have the provincial governments go ahead and make it so that there are provincially regulated financial institutions, like in Alberta's case, Alberta Treasury Branch or Bow Valley Credit Union, Service, Christian Credit Union, etc., go ahead and take on, let's say, 3% of assets in gold and silver, something that's real, something that's tangible, because then it'll send a signal to the market where people will take their credit cards, their accounts, their mortgages, move them over to those other institutions, those provincially regulated institutions that'll be more sound and not under the direct supervision or touch of Justin Trudeau and his cabinet, and serve as a bulwark against a potential currency collapse in Canada.
Wow. Okay. I guess Trudeau's in the perfect position then, because this could lead to chaos. And this, it might, help me out here. You are a former member of parliament of 18 years. Trudeau does nothing. The Bank Act expires. People start to panic because they have no idea if their money has any value whatsoever, to which I actually don't think it will.
Right.
Can he use this to cancel the election in October of next year?
Well, he's used the War Measures Act, the Emergencies Act before. I can't imagine. How could I possibly say with a straight face that he won't do it again? I mean, he didn't do it with fair justification last time with regard to the truckers. If there's a banking crisis that he's created, I don't think it's beyond him at all to utilize something like that, the War Measures Act, the Emergencies Act, to go ahead and cause further mayhem.
Okay, so we're not saying this, everybody. I'm not asking this line of questioning here because I want Canadians and Americans by default to panic about this, but you do have to be ready for this. If the Bank Act expires and your cash goes to zero value in Canada, there'll be chaos, and then he can bring in the war, or we'll call it the War Measures Act again, the Emergencies Act, and shut everything down again, and give the police hyperthyroid individuals wearing body armor that's costumes is what they wear, but give them more guns and more bullets and say, let's just go make sure there's no polling stations open because we're in an emergency that he caused through inaction. Holy crap. This is unbelievable, Rob. Okay. Go ahead, please make your point. Yeah.
Well, it's an incredibly sad scenario, and it's amazing to me the amount of people who aren't paying attention to it. It's black and white. It's clear as day in terms of the amendments to the Bank Act. I think a lot of people are in denial. It's a matter of cognitive dissonance. They say, "Oh, but that can't happen in Canada." Well, he's already changed the legislation. It's already a de facto thing. It's a question of what we do now in response to. I'll talk about a fourth option, okay, which I hope the banks take to heart, which is if I'm one of the major federal chartered banks, the CIBC, Toronto Dominion, CIBC, Toronto, whatever, any Bank of Montreal, Nova Scotia, they could potentially create provincial subsidiaries. So, say for example, you have CIBC of Alberta, for example, okay,
right,
and they could transfer assets to those provincial entities because Trudeau doesn't have jurisdiction over that. So, if they did that in the remaining 14 months before the expiration of the Bank Act, that would mean that he doesn't have the authority to shut them down. But I've yet to meet any serious, senior level bankers that are contemplating that. I don't think they're taking this seriously. Some of them, they have a hard time believing that it's true, that he would do this.
Right. But, they shut us down for a non-existent pandemic for almost 3 years. There's 211 political prisoners in Canada right now. They'll do whatever they want. And now we've got a lot of Australians in the TikTok room right now. So Australia, you got to understand something, that the Canadian financial system is copied from the British financial system, which of course your financial system is copied over or from. So if this happens in Canada, they'll try the same thing in Australia. And the worst part about Australia is that even though your island country is as wide as the United States, you have so few cities and such a small population in relation to the United States that you could actually hide in. I mean, the biggest issue with Australia is geography. You could move inland, but what do you do in the desert that's inland in that area? At least in the United States and Canada, there's forests you could hide in. You could very easily eke out an existence hunting, trapping, fishing, and cutting down trees and building log cabins. It wouldn't really be that difficult. I know, because I was a scout leader for years. But Australia would be a very difficult thing. And New Zealand would be even worse. Where would you go in New Zealand? That's a small country. Where do you go to escape this type of thing? So, Rob, you and I know this is coming. We just know this is coming. We know Trudeau is going to do nothing to protect the Bank Act, which plays directly into his strategy to destroy this country. So let's now answer the questions that are here and all the chat rooms now. Give us a couple of things that Canadians can do with their money right now, between now and June 30th of next year. Please go ahead.
Sure. One, if you can move some of your assets over to provincially chartered financial institutions, well, not chartered, but provincially regulated, I should say, financial institutions, it means that Trudeau is not going to have the power over those things that he will with a federally chartered bank. So, for example, Bow Valley Credit Union here in Alberta, Brett Owen, I probably chit-chat back and forth with him almost every week about this stuff because he's on my email list, and I know he's given presentations about this. He's a big gold bug. And so as a result, he's committed 10% of what they have to gold. In 1971, when Nixon removed the peg of the US dollar to gold, it was at 3%. So 3% of what was out there had to be held in bullion by the United States. And it was redeemable by those countries that held U.S. instruments. So because Charles de Gaulle with France was looking to repatriate the French gold to move it back to Paris from the United States, Nixon didn't want that. He delinked the U.S. dollar from gold in 1971. At that point, 3%. So Brett Olin and I both agree that if you were to reestablish a linkage at 3%, where it got unpegged, if you will, in 1971, is about right. And if we looked at where we were last month with 15 months to go, you could say, well, for every 5 months have those provincially regulated institutions commit to 1%. And then another 5 months later, another 1%, another 5 months later, another 1%, to the point where when you get to that moment of truth, June 30th, 2025, they would have 3% of their assets as a backup with, gold or silver bullion. In Alberta, I would even allow for, say, for example, copper, because those were the three metallic coinages that the Romans used in antiquity, and the other one in Alberta's case, because we have so much oil. So you could use barrels of oil, some sort of oil investment. But that's one thing. Put your money in provincially regulated financial institutions. For those of you in provinces like British Columbia or places that are quasi-socialist, I feel for you. At least Alberta's got a government that's looking to fight the feds on some of these things. You have an opportunity in October to get rid of those people and put in somebody who will try to protect your money, your currency from Ottawa. So I encourage you to do that. Other things, obviously, continue to use cash, because it blocks this ability for all this tracking, to go ahead and figure out everything and everywhere that your money's going and who's getting it and why and all this type of stuff. So continue to go ahead and use cash as much as you can, because it keeps this stuff off the government's radar, as it were. Another thing is, obviously, gold and silver. Let's talk about the other big currency things that are probably going to happen. You've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, this BRICS scenario where they're looking to challenge the US dollar. A scary video, if people want to look at it, is you look at the top 100 countries in the world in terms of their gold reserves. Canada's not on the top 100. Okay? To be on the top 100, all you need is 20 kilograms of gold. Okay? That's number 100, 20 kilograms of gold. Canada doesn't have 20 kilograms of gold in reserve. We have nothing. It was all sold off. We're one of 12 countries in the world that has no gold bullion reserve. The only gold at all is either what's in the ground or in the mint in Winnipeg or Ottawa for the minting of coins. We have no gold bullion reserve to back the currency. So that stuff, if it goes belly up, will be worth toilet paper. Okay, that's how bad it is. The only thing we've got going for us is 60% of our trade is done with the United States, and we have the longest, border with the biggest market in the world, our trading partner to the south. That's it. We don't have any gold bullion backing this stuff up. But all right, what used to happen was what's that?
Yes, there's a list here. Mm-hmm. Very quickly in order. Look at the gold reserves China has. $3,450,694,000 worth. Gold reserve in metric tons, 2,235.
Can I just point out something? This is interesting, because when BRICS first started off, China at that point was claiming 3,000 tons. It's reduced. So these countries that are looking to take on the US dollar and challenge the US dollar, their gold reserves have gone down. China being the biggest one, it's literally shaved off 1/3 of its gold reserves. The other one is Russia, and of course, they're paying for the war in Ukraine, etc., whatever. So these countries that are trying to challenge the US dollar are actually shaving down their gold reserves. I think they're in no position whatsoever to try to challenge the United States as far as gold reserves go. But anyhow, go on.
Yeah, well, there's Canada. Look at that. 0 metric tons of gold. Zero. So, well, the strange part about Canada giving up all of its gold reserves in reference to back its currency is that gold, the $50 gold coin that's sold by the Canadian Mint and or silvergoldbull.com are 99.99% pure. Like, actually it's 3 nines. And they're really sought after coins worldwide. So we have enough gold in the country to make really nice, worthwhile coins that literally are worth $3,025 as of today. But we don't have any reserves to protect our nation from folding.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's ridiculous. Like, just to paint this for people, I used to have an office in East Block, which is the oldest building on Parliament Hill. It dates back to 1865. It dates back 2 years previous to Confederation. And so there used to be Sir John A. Macdonald's office as Prime Minister. It was on the third floor. Georgia Chen Cartier's office, also on the third floor. Privy Council, former cabinet office, third floor. Like, I used to give tours of the building. And when I did, you could go into the basement, and we had massive vaults with beautiful scrolled, brass doors, etc., that were where our gold bullion reserve was held. And it was held there because A, it was a building that went back that far. B, it was in solid rock, which Parliament Hill is made of. And another factor, C, was it had a permanent armed guard 24/7. Okay. So if you're going to put it someplace, not too bad. There's enough cops around, et cetera, et cetera. That now is a cafeteria. Those doors are still there, but there's no vault. Okay. In behind where those doors are, where the gold was in those vaults were all eliminated. The doors are still there. They're still in the casement of the wall, but that's where I used to go and eat poached eggs in the morning. Okay. It's a cafeteria now for East Block. There's no gold bullion reserve anymore. It's gone. I literally, my office was on top of it. It's gone. Okay. So, so I think this BRICS thing is not going to be a successful challenge to the US dollar, but what it'll do is it'll cause complications for the US dollar. It'll cause reverberations and ripple effects through the Forex currency exchanges. Mm-hmm. And I think at some stage, the US dollar in a real currency crisis may have to repeg to gold. And if that happens, all of a sudden gold goes from, I remember when I used to say this, a while ago, and I said gold would go from 2,000 to 4,000, and people were like, well, now it's 3,000, okay, and it'll probably go to like 6 or more, okay, if the United States has to repeg to gold. The other thing I want to talk about, not only this BRICS scenario, but I want to talk about the euro, okay? Because, with the euro, you've got 20 plus countries. Each one of these countries, when you calculate in macroeconomic formulas, the value of its currency, you take into account about 23 variables, right? You take into account inflation and what the savings rate is, what imports, exports, what the taxation rate is, productivity, GDP. There's all these things you take into account when you're trying to figure out its currency, and if you have 20 plus countries with 20 plus variables, that means you've got 400 to 500 variables to try to figure out what the hell the value of the euro is. Now, in the big picture, you've had the British decide that they're out. So the bankers in London, the guys who are the pound sterling guys, they've left the scene. They don't want to be dealing with this anymore. You've got Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain that are basically all insolvent, okay? And you've got the final set of serious bankers, which are the guys in Frankfurt, okay, who have decided with Germany electing the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, into the Bundestag, they're not willing to hold the bag on this anymore either. The young Germans don't want to be holding the bag and paying the bills for the rest of Europe. So as a result, the British bankers, the London bankers, pound sterling guys are out. The Frankfurt guys are leaving, okay? That means there's nobody holding the bag on this thing. So I don't know when it's going to collapse, but I think if I did, I would buy puts on the 90-day period of when I thought it was likely to collapse and make a fortune. But this stuff I don't think is going to last. I think Margaret Thatcher was right back in the 1980s when she said the common market made sense so that the Czechs could sell their crystal and the British could sell their cod and the Icelanders could sell their aluminum, all without a lot of taxation and give greater purchasing power to the citizens. But the idea of having no immigration controls, or the idea of having this currency that is treated the same by everybody when they've all got different savings rates and taxation policies, and it doesn't make any sense. So that thing's going to go belly up. So that's going to be another massive challenge or ripple effect in the marketplace, in the currency exchanges, et cetera, whatever. And that's another reason the United States may have to repeg to gold, which once again begs the question, what will be the relation, the dollar to gold at that point if they have to repeg?
Okay. If the United States goes back on the gold standard, do they have to then get rid of the Federal Reserve and stop borrowing money that the Federal Reserve creates from nothing, essentially, and then create their own United States dollar again, and have that dollar be exchangeable for gold? Is that what they would have to do?
Well, the favorite system that I have and that we've ever had, I think, actually, well, okay, there's a couple different things to look into. One is what the Romans did in antiquity, which is to say you have a gold coin, you have a silver coin, you have a copper coin. It worked for about 800 years. Now, there was issues with regard to shaving the value of those coins and shaving off some of the metal. And that's why they put ridges on coins. If you look at a lot of coins, they have ridges in them. It's so that you can tell if the coin's been shaved or not. But let's face it, if it's a coin made out of aluminum or, whatever, who cares, right? I mean, but if it's real metal, if it's a real strategically valuable metal like silver, gold, or copper, it makes sense. Okay, so that was the Roman system. Then you move forward, okay, and you have the free banking system, I think, is the next best, which is what Canada had from 1817 until about 1914, the beginning of World War I. And in that case, we had about 20-some banks that had either gold or silver bullion. And then based on the amount of gold bullion or silver bullion they had, they could issue currency. So you knew that your bill was exchangeable for that amount. And that was very well respected. So Canadian currency at that stage was traded very well in Great Britain as well in the Caribbean, all for the triangle of trade between Halifax, Jamaica, and London type of thing. So that was very well respected. And I think we had we had the longest running free banking system in the world. Canada can be very proud of that, from 1817 to 1914. That worked. That was beautiful. And I think that's something we could and should return to at some stage. All right. So now you get to this issue with regard to the reserves, the Federal Reserve, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. One of the things we have to come to terms with is that governments have been buying their own debt instruments. I mean, normally the way these markets would have worked in the past is, we issue treasury bills or bonds, people buy them, and they get a rate of return, and et cetera, et cetera. But let's face it, for a while now, the governments have been issuing these debt instruments, and they've been buying them off of themselves. Think about that. They've been buying their own debt instruments. That can't continue indefinitely, folks. Okay. Previously, maybe the Saudis would have bought, the Chinese would have bought, various people would have bought these things. Canadians would have bought them, right? I at one point had a Canada Savings bond. Okay. My aunt, bless her heart, bought it for me as a birthday present when I was a young boy. But you can't have a scenario for long where the governments are clearing their own debt instruments and buying their own debt instruments. It's like you're printing money to buy your own money. You can't keep on doing that. Like, even if you do that once, surely to God, to goodness, the marketplace should respond to that and say, hold on a second. The U.S. just bought its own debt instruments. They didn't sell them to anybody else. They bought their own debt instruments, right? They're buying their own money with their own. It's insanity. But then if they keep on doing it, which is where we've been for the last number of years, of course that's untenable. I think of, say, for example, like France, after Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo and the Bourbon monarchy came back, they wanted to spend money. So what did they do? They went ahead and created fiat currency by only holding a reserve in gold bullion and then siphoning all the rest of this debt out there, and they spent like crazy until the day of reckoning came. And then there was a run on the banks and it imploded. And the bankers who were in charge of that left France and became the bankers in Italy and the bankers to the Vatican, and then eventually moved to the United States. Okay. So this stuff never goes on indefinitely, folks, and you can't have governments buying their own debt instruments.
All right. Couple of quick questions here. Number one is from Rumble. Guestet is asking, please ask your guest if the Canadian government will give the public any notice on the central bank digital currency when it begins. Will they actually advertise this or let the public know? And if they do advertise it, how in depth is the advertising campaign likely to be?
Well, the budget that's upcoming here in April, I think it's April 16th, it's presented in the House of Commons. That literally will have a bunch of facilitation in it for central bank digital currency. So that they're already well along the beginning of the process. I've heard through back channels that the Bank of Canada is going to go hot and heavy on this after a subsequent election. So they're already setting up the mechanisms in this budget, in the budget that's presented in the House on April the 16th. They've already done studies. They've already done a bunch of trials around the world on these things, various countries.
Right.
At one point, we were sitting with a half a dozen places that were looking at this. We've now got 120, different banks that are involved in this, worldwide type of thing. So and let me just talk about the reason why some people are driving this so heavily. I mean, yeah, it's control, right?
Right.
But
Right.
when you look at China, okay, if China opens up its currency, okay, if it actually has a free exchanging currency, the money floods out of China like nobody's business. That's why you've got homes in Vancouver that are priced beyond what anybody can buy, unless you're coming from Hong Kong or something like that. And why that is because the Chinese would rather have a property in Vancouver they don't live in that's sprouting weeds than have their money in a debt instrument in China or in a bank in China or with the government of China. They don't trust their own government. So that's why the money floods out of there. And so if they open on a free exchange, they lose money like crazy. So they love the idea of having the Chinese central bank set a set exchange rate with the Bank of Canada, with the Federal Reserve, etc., with all these central banks around the world, because then there is no free floating currency. Like, in some of these commie dictatorships, you go to Havana, you go to some of these places, you can exchange with cab drivers or whatnot for an exchange rate that's more favorable than what the bank offers. Well, if you don't have cash and all there is central banks, and the central banks all determine what the fixed rates are for exchange between each other, there's no private dealing in what the value of the currency is. And so
Okay.
now China doesn't have to worry.
So what you just said there makes sense, because down here in Costa Rica, the money scale's weird. Yeah, you've got 1,000 colognes here in Costa Rica is $2 US, or about $2.50 Canadian. It'll buy you a pineapple and an orange. That's what you'll get for that amount of money.
Okay.
But when you start buying things in bulk here, everybody in Costa Rica especially, I grabbed 5 pineapples and 40 cucumbers, and the guy gave me this ridiculous price of 25,000 colognes. I said, no, 10,000. And then he wanted to negotiate. So no, 11,000. Okay, 12,000 final number. I started walking away and he took the money. So you can actually still make that kind of a deal with cash. And that's what Rob is saying here. Make the deal with the cab guy. Get 9 people in a cab and say, dude, how's $100 cash? Turn the meter off. You can do these things with cash. You can't do them with credit cards, unless that guy is on crypto and just doesn't care about Canada Revenue Agency or the IRS or Australia's ATO. Or the crazy, whatever they call it.
In Venezuela, for example, there were different exchange rates. If you were a friend of the Chavez or later Maduro government, you had a more favorable exchange rate. If you weren't a friend, then you had a less favorable exchange rate, et cetera, et cetera. But if you were to go to a cab driver in Caracas, okay, they would far prefer to take US dollars than they would their own currency, which literally is worthless. And so as a result, you can actually barter, for sums of whatever. And the exchange rates are going to be more favorable in the private settings amongst cab drivers than what they would be with the central bank. But if you don't have cash, then there is no private arbiter of what the currency is worth. It's just what the central banks agree to it as, right? And you imagine Trudeau, if he printed up $1 trillion already and was into seizing bank accounts for the people supporting the truckers, with the press of a button, which he's already got in the Bank Act now, he can create more currency for even more inflation and for even higher interest rates with the press of a button.
Okay, I got 4 questions in a row here, and they're all off of the Rumble chat. So let's just fire the first one here. Question: what's going to happen to loans and mortgages?
Well, worst case scenario, and I know that Mr. Oland and I have talked about this. The Soviet Union in 1917, they had the October Revolution. By November, they had created Gazbank. And that's
Okay.
basically like the Bank of Canada. They created a central bank. And what they did was they collapsed basically the private sector banks in Russia and took on all those assets as part of the Gazbank, or what would be known as the central bank. And then after that, everything was being dealt with through the central bank. Like, one of the things that I want Canadian bankers to understand, and not just Canadian, worldwide, I want you to understand this. If you move towards central bank digital currency, there is less and less need for retail banking. Okay. If you're not doing the exchanges, for example, on US dollars and whatever when people are traveling, if you're not looking after these various things, then in a sense it negates the reason to have retail banking. Okay. And it, so in the Soviet Union, they got rid of all these banks. By the way, the Soviet Union had more private banks than Canada does nationally. In other words, it's easier to nationalize the banks in Canada in 2024 than it was in Russia in 1917. Let that sink in.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that easy.
Yeah, it's easier. There's less banks to deal with, in Canada today, federal banks, federally chartered banks, than there were in Russia in 1917. So in the Soviet Union, they created Gazbank, and that took on all of those assets because they literally collapsed all the private sector banks. So, I would like to think that it's not going to be that instantaneous. But, once again, as I've said with Mr. Oland, with Bow Valley Credit Union, take this guy at his word. When Trudeau puts into a piece of legislation that he's collapsing the Bank Act in June 30th of 2025, take him at his word. When he seizes the bank accounts of people who support the truckers and literally collapses billions of dollars worth of Canadian banking system, take him at his word, right? When they run all the studies that they're doing with the Bank of Canada on central bank digital currency, take them at their word, right? Don't think it can't happen here.
Rob,
yeah.
Biggest problem with people is that they don't take overtly powerful individuals at their word. Right. Klaus Schwab is a prime example. And this is not just Canada. This is the entire world, where he comes out and he's talking about the fourth industrial revolution. One of the commentary that he made in that book, and that he makes publicly all the time, is that he wants to control the world. There has to be complete control over the world. And one of the ways to get that to happen is to use inflation to destroy everything, but to reduce the white population around the world immensely, because it's always white people who rebel first, the most, and the best. Whereas Chinese people, and this is in his book, I didn't say this, he did. Chinese people and Southeast Asians do what they're told, because their culture has always been, do not look anyone in the eye, look at the floor when you're being scolded. So they're easier to control. And in his book also, he makes the statement that Africans and Middle Easterners can be used to create a chaos in both of those environments. So he's doing it. Why are we not listening to multi-billionaires when they are telling us these things? And Bill Gates, 15 years ago, said the same thing about the reduction of the population. And how are we going to do that? We introduce vaccines. He said population reductions, we do it with vaccines. And then 15 years later, 12 years later it was, there's a pandemic worldwide where everyone's taking needles and dying. Listen to our leaders. When they say what they're doing, they're actually telling us in advance they're killing us, and nobody's listening.
I have a book in my library that was printed in 2002, and it talked about the Great Reset coming in 2030. So some of these people have been planning this stuff for decades, folks. And I think we just kind of didn't take them seriously. But let me tell you, folks, we had better start taking it very seriously. Further to the loan question, basically, you're going to have a severe restriction of credit. You're going to have a real credit crash. I mean, we almost had a collapse of the financial system in 2007, 2008, when you had AIG, subprime, Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, etc. I would imagine with the CBDC stuff, it's going to be as bad, if not worse.
Okay. I also have to just address something quickly here, Rob, is that for all of you around Canada who are watching this, you all just got assessed by the Canada Revenue Agency. You don't owe them anything, or you certainly do not owe them what they say that you do. They used AI to write letters to threaten all of you and frighten you into giving them money because they are broke. And they all those letters are signed with the same name, Bob Hamilton. So if you've been assessed by Canada Revenue Agency and you really want to know what your rights are, book a consultation with me immediately. There it is, bottom left corner, kevinjjohnston.com. I'm going to sit with you for an hour, discuss your rights, look at your case, and get rid of the CRA, or Canada Revenue Agency. They are lying to us. Rob, this fascinates me, where the CRA just used AI to randomly pick numbers, and the magic numbers for almost everybody out there that I've spoken to, it's over 300 people now have come to me on a personal level saying, look at this letter. The numbers are between 50,000 and 56,000. So AI just assessed that number to as many people as it possibly could. Now, you having worked in government for as long as you did, this Bob Hamilton guy, does he exist, or is he an actor?
Yeah, no. He's a real person. But I just read an article today about his lies when he was representing the Canada Revenue Agency to a parliamentary committee. For example, when he was asked about the CERB situation, where there were Canada CRA employees who were illegally attributing to themselves CERB payments, it turns out, he said there was a few. It turns out it was close to 500. Right? So like 1%, one of every 100 CRA staffers is either fired or under investigation for channeling CERB funds to themselves illegally. I got to say that the organization is just incredibly corrupt. I know with myself, like, they tried to lay 7 charges against me. Everything was thrown out of court. It cost me a fortune. They seized 75% of my equity in a property, which I'm now taking them to tax court to get back. They're dragging it out for as long as they possibly can. They've now got 59,000 employees. The Department of National Defense on paper is supposed to have 68,000, but the reality is there's 25% vacancy. The CRA is larger than the Department of National Defense. It is 10 times the Germans in terms of collecting taxes per capita. It is 7 times the size of the IRS in the United States per capita. It is a beast. The reporting mechanisms that they use, the snitch line, over 99%, I think it's 99.9% of the snitches that come in to create audits are done just for witch hunts and vendettas. There is almost no revenue that comes off of that, but it is used as a witch hunt tool. This thing is so corrupt and it's so bloated. It needs to be seriously overhauled. The ombudsman for the CRA, Taxpayers Ombudsman, does not report to Parliament. They report to the minister and to the bureaucrats they serve. It has no independent reporting. There's just so much bad that's going on there. And, with the affirmative action stuff that goes on in terms of the hiring there, we've got foreign governments that are influencing the CRA and holding it captive and using it as their own tools to advance their objectives in Canada. And so they've got people for these foreign governments that are using it to go after Canadian citizens that they deem to be problematic. And I can think of that. I have a friend of mine, David Elderfield, who has been trying to get his issues dealt with now for a very long time. He had a company in the U.S. that was going to pay him $14 million U.S., the equivalent of $20 million Canadian, because he developed ways to check with a spectrometer what was going on inside sea containers. And the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. was endorsing it. Canadian Border Services was endorsing it. The Chinese pretended that they were interested in it just so they could get a copy of their prospectus. And then they did everything in their power to crush it. And the CRA went ahead and scared away all his creditors, never even performing an audit. They refused to perform an audit because they know that they wouldn't have been able to corroborate what they had told the creditors with the audit. Like we've got some really egregious stuff that's going on with the CRA.
The funny part about the CRA, though, is I've been looking at case law because I've been looking for all kinds of ways to help people just either get away from taxes or greatly reduce taxes, or you know, in some way stick it to the CRA with lawsuits. Now it turns out that the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, they don't win in court. The vast majority of cases that I've been reading in the CanLII system, the CRA is settling or outright losing. So the Canada Revenue Agency is actually almost never the plaintiff. They're always the defendant. So they're actually not suing anybody. They are just issuing threats, locking bank accounts like you, locking properties up. They're breaking the law every single day, but they're not using the courts to do it. So when we, the people, then use the courts to get back at them, simple things like file a motion in the court so you can ask a judge to lift the lien on your property. CRA doesn't even show up for these things. So you get your ex parte ruling. And the average Canadian doesn't even understand what a motion is. You can ask a judge for anything. He can throw you out of the courtroom and say, that's dumb, or he can grant it to you. So the CRA is not winning in any of these. Now, also, I was alluding to the fact we talked privately before the show, is that the CRA is actually not capable really of performing criminal investigations. They have to turn that over to the police. So whenever we see these articles that some guy gets 9 months prison time for fraud, it's because it was a police investigation, not a CRA investigation. The CRA might cooperate with police, but the Canada Revenue Agency are not a police force. You guys, did you all not watch the video where I talked to a CRA staff member and I asked them a question? Are you a police force? No. Can you put people in jail? No. They know they can't. So we all have to start fighting back, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing now, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's such a joke. Like in my circumstance, you know, they violated their protocols right, left, and center. They were leaking information to the favorable media, the CBC, you know, before it even went to court. That's highly unusual. They usually get a judgment first before they comment on anything. Like they went so out of their way to penalize me. You know, it's called vexatious, you know, malicious treatment. But yeah, no, it's they need to be hemmed in so badly.
Big time. Okay, we got some more questions here that I'd like to get to. Let me just grab the next one in line here. So Rumble comment, this is from Scott1673. I'll toss this in the room for you, Rob. It's on the bottom of the screen right now. Ask Rob where to put our money. Overseas, elsewhere. I get to here. I'll throw some ideas out. Rob, what do you recommend? Property, gold, silver, Bitcoin, diversification, property outside the country. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I like gold and silver because, you know, it's very real and tangible, and it's got, you know, thousands of years of scriptural and written history to back that up as being real money. Warren Buffett makes a point where he says that you could take all the gold in the world and put it into a massive cube, like 53 feet by 53 feet by 53 feet or whatever. And what does it produce? You know, ergo by farmland, which is what Bill Gates is up to, right? So I get that. If you can buy into a gold mine or a silver mine that's actually producing silver and gold, you know, that you get out of it, that's pretty cool because that's actually productive, right? But I think it's hard to beat those because it's real money. You know, like, let me point out that, you know, when the banking crisis began in Russia in 1917, you could buy a £1 sterling, British pound, for 45 kopecks. By the time this stuff all fully unraveled, like years later, 1921, when even the Russians were forced to be minting silver and then gold coins in 1923 because nobody trusted the system. It was a gong show. 10% of them were all starving to death, or 1 out of 13, I should say, were starving to death in the Soviet Union. At that point, it was 5 billion kopecks to be able to buy a pound sterling of silver, right? So that's how bad the stuff can get. So silver is a little more cheaply priced in relative terms than gold. So if gold goes up by, let's say, double or triple, silver would probably go up by triple or quadruple, where it's at, because for various reasons, silver is used in more productive, things than gold is. Gold, is used for transistors and some stuff, but it's not as much of an industrial metal. So that's not bad. I think you're going to find that a lot of people will probably park their money in real estate because, once again, it's something tangible. But I would say, from my personal experience with the CRA, when those jokers go ahead and put liens and various things on the property, it's hard because a bank may not want to renew the loan if they put a bogus lien, et cetera, et cetera. So those are always complications too.
I have a solution for that, though, everybody. When you're going to buy your house, get a hold of me. Don't put your house in your name. Call this guy, Kevin J. Johnston. Yeah, you just got to do it, because I'm telling you, if you have your house in your name, Rob is correct. They'll just go ahead and put a lien on that because your name is on the assets. No, talk to me before you make these decisions. Rob, please continue. Go ahead.
No problem. Also, people are talking about jurisdictional issues, right? So should I put my money here rather than there, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's face it. Canada under Trudeau is in a terrible position, but does that mean that all of a sudden, Russia under Putin looks good? No. So I would say this, of all the jurisdictions in North America, the one that is the least taxed in like a period of 50 to 100 years is Wyoming. When you look at a combination of value-added taxes, state income taxes, fuel taxes, etc., Wyoming has overall the lowest of the lower 48. The only one that even sometimes competes with it is Alaska, and that's because of their rebate with regard to their oil royalties and stuff. So I think if you had to choose any place in North America, Wyoming would probably be my first choice. One of the reasons people like Florida so much is it's one of the 7 states that doesn't have any state income tax. So, you got Wyoming, you got Florida, you got Tennessee, New Hampshire, Texas, Washington. I'm missing the other one, but anyhow, you get the idea. And the best thing that Florida has going for it is, you got DeSantis as governor because he's been fighting a lot of the woke stuff and didn't go along with the COVID agenda and everything else. So there's a lot to that. But the other thing is that they also have the best protection for your private property, your domicile, your primary residence. So in Florida, your other creditors can't go after that. I think the only creditor that can actually go after that might be the IRS and the bank that you owe the loan to, the mortgage. But other than that, no other creditor can go after your primary residence, regardless of how large the sum is. Alberta had a protection like that because of the Great Depression, where I think you were protected up to $250,000, which once upon a time was a serious sum of money. Nowadays, most people's homes are worth more than $250,000, but Alberta had a protection. They should probably increase that to like $1 million so that people can't go after your asset, unless you're like one of those primary creditors.
Yes, and someone's asking me a question here in TikTok. I own a home already. Whose name should it be in? What you do is you get a hold of me. We'll open up a numbered corporation for you and transfer the title to that numbered corporation. Now, people say, but what about what happens when you sell it? Do you have to pay capital gains? Well, if you don't talk to me, yes, you do. If you do talk to me and you get everything ironed out, no, you don't, because there are provisos in law that I have been studying now very intently and working with lawyers on and chartered accountants, and we have discovered everything. So these aren't loopholes. They're not loopholes. It's just the way that the country is structured. So that is what you should do, everybody, is make sure that your house and your car are in a numbered corporation. That way, when it's time to sell the house, you just sell the corporation and the house goes with it, which is quite remarkable. All right, Rob. So I got more questions here. The next one is
Can I just add to that and say my dad worked for CNR, Canadian National Railways, and he knew that amongst the various railways, BC Rail, CP, they would often talk or collude on prices, which was in violation of the Combines Act. And so everything was in my mother's name because he worried that at some point, they could try to nab him on something like that. But he's since passed away years ago. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
So, Rumble comment from Guestet. Please ask your guest if and when the Canadian government will eliminate cash. That's a distinct possibility. But Rob, you're the pro. Let's hear it.
Well, they're going to start putting in some of the mechanisms with regard to that in this budget on April the 16th. So let me just talk a little bit about what these mechanisms are. So in China, they have what's the social credit score, okay? And so if you criticize the government in China, your social credit score goes down. It means you can't buy plane tickets, train tickets, apply for a government job, etc. Here in Canada, they're using a more politically correct, nebulous, kind of touchy-feely environmental thing, ESG, environmental social governance. But then they've also got these OSFI requirements where they want the banks to be reporting more and more to the government and what's going on and sharing. They call it interoperability and transparency, right? But what that means is that they're violating the privacy. So in say, for example, April 16th, with the budgets that's coming down, they actually are instituting a bunch of these violations of privacy where the banks are going to be forced to share more and more information with the other banks and with the government. So you can imagine that the stuff you're talking about with Bob Hamilton with the CRA is going to become more pervasive because they're going to have more tools at their disposal to go ahead and try to figure out ways to squeeze people. So once again, I can't stress heavily enough, if you feel comfortable taking your stuff, whether it's a credit card or it's a bank account or it's a mortgage, and moving it from a federally chartered institution, which is going to have to be compliant with OSFI, with this violation of privacy stuff, et cetera, with this transparency stuff, et cetera, move it over to a provincially regulated financial institution. I feel sorry for those of you that are in the socialist people's republics that are run by the NDP in this country on that stuff. But if you can, try to move it to those institutions because Trudeau will have far less control over it.
Yeah, there's also the option to move your funds here to Costa Rica or to Panama or to El Salvador. There are ways to get all that done. Right now, I would say that Costa Rica is the safest bet, mainly because there are no treaties of any kind with the Canadian government. Thank God for that. Property, I agree with Rob. Gold and silver, if you're able to hide it, if you're able to keep it hidden, and you are also in a position to, let's say, just keep your mouth quiet, like keep your mouth closed. Don't tell people about your gold or your silver, except for maybe taking photographs of it and handing that over to your insurance company for insurance purposes. Don't tell anyone that you have it. Where everyone makes the big mistake, Rob, is they actually talk. Go ahead.
I wanted a couple things, because this person asked the question about timing. So you have April 16th, which is the budget, and there's going to be a lot more of this OSFI stuff and a lot more of this quote unquote accountability and sharing of information, violation of privacy stuff. Another thing, obviously, is the Bank Act with the expiration date June 30th, 2025, and also what I'm hearing from behind, if you will, through the grapevine, that the Bank of Canada is going to be really looking to push this central bank digital currency stuff after the next election. Okay, so those are three timelines to watch for. But the other thing I want to point out is the difference between bullion and coins. Now, Kevin, you pointed out earlier that the government of Canada, from our mint, you can get a $50 coin, but that is what's stamped on the coin. You and I both know that coin right now trades for over $3,000, right? But that is the nominal value of the coin. Okay, if the government is really nasty, what they could try to do is say that they are expropriating or reclaiming are asking you to cash in your coins at their nominal value. So if you have a coin that you know is worth $3,000 on a free gold market, and they're telling you should exchange it back in because they need it, it's the law, bada bing, bada boom, you can't melt it down, you can't destroy it, etc., blah blah blah. Okay, and yet you have to trade it back in at the nominal value of $50. You're getting hosed. That's why bullion is better in this case, because it doesn't have a government stipulated face value or nominal value. In the United States, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought in the New Deal, 1933, they didn't want competition, so he made it illegal for you to own gold. Okay, now nobody went to jail, but they certainly did try to apply pressure to people to relinquish their gold holdings, etc. Like I said, nobody went to jail, but if you have a choice between whether or not it's something with a nominal stamp value on it from the government or bullion, I think you're better off with bullion.
And bullion just means bars.
That's right. Yeah, bars, ingots, stuff that doesn't have a nominal value. Because if it's stamped with, the Queen's portrait on it and with a nominal value, the government could potentially say that that's ours. We're getting rid of currency. Hand that over, and we're going to give you the nominal value. And if you're stupid enough to comply with that, that's your problem. But seriously, if you go with bullion, it's not the same deal. It hasn't been minted by the government with the head of state's portrait on it and with a nominal value imprinted on it.
So the stamping of the head of state really makes it that different from bullion?
Well, you have to. What you have to do is you have to put yourself inside the mind of a control freak dictator. And if they want gold, and if they want it on the cheap, they would try to scare people to turn in their gold for its nominal value of $50 rather than $3,025, and tell you that if you tried to melt that coin, that you are now in violation of tampering with currency, etc., and you could face a fine or jail time for that. So don't give them that. Don't give them that luxury. Don't allow these dictators that ability to tell you how to do it. If you have bullion, ingots, bars, that type of thing, I think you're better off.
Okay, got a couple more questions here. This one's also from Rumble, from Canuck Mang 80. Ask Rob Anders, does he know about Dr. Jack Klundert in Windsor, Ontario? He's an optometrist who won against the Canada Revenue Agency that the federal government is not allowed to indirectly tax Canadians according to the B&A Act. I don't know about that case. Do you?
I don't, but it sounds fascinating, and I will look into it because
me too.
I literally just filed a bunch of documents with the Tax Court of Canada on March 31st, and they're dragging me through this process over the next year because they don't want to hand back money they owe me. But anyhow, I appreciate that reference.
No, most certainly. And I'm getting some questions here about what does it mean at the top of the site where it says get rid of all your corporate debt. So everybody, what I can tell you is that I've also discovered a way, if you've got a corporation and you have Canada Revenue Agency debt, GST and HST debt, bank debt, and debtors of any kind, I could eliminate them, the whole thing, in between 2 to 6 weeks with, of course, your full cooperation. Do what you're asked to do, and it will all go away. I've been working very hard on this, everybody. If you want to get rid of your corporation's debt, every last one, get rid of all the phone calls, get a hold of me, book a consultation right now at kevinjjohnston.com. Like I said, Rob, I've been working very hard on looking at everything the CRA's got to offer. And what I have also found is this Bob Hamilton guy, who's the commissioner of the Canada Revenue Agency, whom you've now confirmed is a real human being, because all the accountants in Canada are asking, like, who is this guy?
I saw his picture today when I was reading through his lives that he did about how many CRA employees were taking CERB money. But anyhow, yeah.
Yes. So if it's an income tax debt, a corporate tax debt, a GST and HST debt, or a fees debt, or even CERB, like up top there, if it's any of those, his signature is on all of those letters. Now, does anybody out there really believe this guy signed $5 million threatening letters. It's probably more now. So these things are generated by artificial intelligence designed to scare you. And like we covered in the last show that we did this, the psychologists, the military grade psychologists are the ones who write the actual text of these letters to frighten women more than men, so that married couples will have the wife going, "Oh my God, you have to pay it." And the husband says, "Fine, shut up, I'll write the check." So ladies, they're written specifically for that reason. Don't give them the power over you. Just get a hold of me. Just kevinjjohnston.com right there. Get a hold of me. And we're going to get rid of these ridiculous threats that you're getting. But don't fight with your husband or your boyfriend, lover, whatever. Don't. That's what they want. All right. Team up with your man. Don't fight your man. Let's get rid of your debts. All right. I'm actually really curious here. You talked about Trudeau's got a budget. Some of the budget for next year is going to go into advertising, the end of the bank, and going to central bank digital currencies. We've also got the progressive conservatives, or whatever they call themselves now, the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre. They're saying that they want to have digital ID so that kids don't go on Pornhub. Now, it's specifically this one website, Pornhub.com. But how many hundreds of millions of porno websites are there which were not mentioned? So Pornhub is the scapegoat for this. So we've got Trudeau killing the banks, but then we've got the conservatives want to bring in digital ID to protect the children, as they say. So now what? Who do we believe here? Who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? Go ahead. Let me hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm generally of the opinion that you have to be very careful with regard to what you trust the government with. I mean, I went to Ottawa with some measure of distrust for the government as a Reform Party, advocate, thinking that, the government's too big. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Lots of waste, lots of corruption. Once I got there, I realized it was worse than I thought. So it's bad. Okay. It's bad. And now, having left with the CRA and the tricks they've pulled, I realize it's even worse than I knew when I was there. And that says something. So I've gone through 3 stages with regard to that. And I literally think it's gone too far. I think Big Brother and government has just gotten way too big. When you saw what happened with COVID and masks and lockdowns and the truckers and the seizing bank accounts and the growth here of the CRA and everything else, like, people, if the government's big enough to give you everything you want, it's big enough to take everything you have. And that's where we're at. And I think we need to have a fundamental reform of the size of government. I think that the questions that Milei is asking in Argentina need to be asked around the world. Do we really want these massive, governments? I mean, I've heard stories, for example, about We and the $1 billion that they were going to get, and that some of that money was meant for Sophie Trudeau as hush money, etc. Like, when you're dealing with all these huge sums of dough, there's a tremendous amount of stuff that can be fudged and slushed in that. And that's what does happen. Like, one of the things I'll give Paul Martin credit for was that before he was finance minister, they only caught things, examined things that were $100 million or larger in the budget scrutiny. Yeah, can you believe that? So if you wanted to sneak something in, you did it at the $99 million level. Okay. But then, I know it's ridiculous, right? But then when he became finance minister, he wanted to catch more stuff. So he said anything above 10 million is flagged and shows up as an individual item. And then they caught tons of stuff because bureaucrats had learned to hide things at the $99 million and below level. But now all of a sudden things were being caught at the $10 million level. So all of a sudden you could achieve all these cost savings because they were doing a bunch of stuff below the radar at 99 million and below. And now all of a sudden you were catching it at 10. And that was a huge thing. Can you imagine if we reset the budget parameters to say that everything had to be an individualized, itemized amount at 1 million? Can you imagine what you would catch? And even that, like, for most people, $1 million is enough to lead a good life and pay off their mortgage, right? But it's just ridiculous, folks. And so I really caution people, with regard to central bank digital currency, or just giving the government more power for tracking and apps and figuring out, knowing where you are and how much energy you're using. Like, one of the things I say to people on central bank digital currency, because I go door to door with this stuff with the petition, is I say, they're going to dictate to you through environmental social governance, ESG scores. They're going to determine, are you driving too much? Are you buying too much gasoline? Are you traveling too much? Are you being compliant with a 15-minute city? Et cetera, et cetera. That's what this stuff is intended for. I remember years ago when I was a man in my 20s, when I was first elected to the House of Commons, I sat through some pretty boring transport committee meetings, and Reg Alcock, who later became president of the Treasury Board, he was super excited about this stuff. I remember thinking to myself, what's going on? But they were talking about these smart cities, and they were talking about, having all these cameras in the traffic lights and determining, whether it was going to be green or red or amber, depending upon how much traffic was there, and trying to alter that, during rush hours for more efficient, transportation and everything else. And I remember thinking to myself as a young MP at the time in my 20s, I thought, why the hell do we want to pay for cameras in all these damn traffic lights? Like, what the hell is this? Now I realize, because I remember I said some of these books on the Great Reset were published in 2002. These guys were plotting out how to control the population, not just for traffic flows, but where are you going? How much are you traveling? How much carbon, how big is your carbon footprint? How much gasoline are you using? What type of, car do you use? Is it a gas guzzler or not? Like that's where all this stuff is going.
Absolutely. Speaking of cash, we have a 50-50 draw tonight, everybody. We have sold 27 tickets so far. There's $270 in the pot. Brenda, Chris, what do we else have? We got Chris, we got Carl, Jennifer, Sue. I think it's Papador. Is that how I say your name? No, we got $270 in the pot. Someone's going to win half of that so far. And the draw is going to take place in about 20 minutes. Head over to kevinjjohnston.me, kevinjjohnston.me right now and get your 50-50 tickets. If you don't feel like using your credit card on my website, no problem. Email money transfers are just fine right over there. freedomreport.ca@gmail.com. Thank you, Brenda, Chris, Jennifer, Susan, Palmer. I think I'm saying it right. Thank you all for buying tickets. We greatly appreciate that. Yeah, this whole thing about cameras is in the city of Chicago. There was this was weird. It was about 10 years ago. They decided that they were going to have 1/8 of a second difference in when it snags you going through a yellow light. And that 1/8 of a second difference brought in $10 million in new fines in 1 week. So they realized, oh boy, this is going to get us sued. So they put everything back and just waited for those to fight those tickets in court, and they would just get rid of the ones where people fought the tickets. But that's all this is. It's stealing money. Manhattan right now has got cameras everywhere. It's $7.50 to drive your motorcycle now anywhere at all in downtown Manhattan. I think it's $25 for a car. It's crazy. Edmonton is doing the same thing. In June, they're going to be activating that system. So you're going to start getting not tickets in the mail, but warnings in the mail saying, hi, Mr. Smith, you live in the Southwest, but you drove to the Northeast. You crossed 4 zone barriers. You naughty person, you're spending fuel or expending fuel, and we're going to start fining you after a set amount of time. And no one's going to do anything about this. You figure that the Americans would do what the British are doing and cutting the cameras down. Nope. They're letting it happen. Canadians, you figure they might do what the British are doing. That's spraying black tar over top of the lenses of these cameras. Nope. They're letting it happen. The Brits are the only ones cutting these cameras down. The rest of us are just putting up with it. So it's a matter of theft, and you are correct. It will be control. Now, if anybody wants to understand zone control, an amazing movie. It's called In Time with is it Timberlake, Justin Timberlake. He acts incredibly well in this movie. Everyone has a clock on their arm, and the currency is time. So if your clock on your arm goes to 0, you die. Just boom, it kills you on the spot. But while the clock is running, you don't age anymore. And the whole of society is broken down into zones where you've got to spend a month of currency of your life just to cross a zone into a better place. That's where it's going to go, everybody. They're going to bankrupt you. I mean, they're not going to kill you, but they're going to bankrupt you with these zones. So watch In Time to see what poverty is really like. They nail it. And I mean, they nail it. Okay. That's my rant over on that one. There's more questions here.
Yeah. You know, I did a petition on radar cameras. We actually got some of them pulled in Canmore type of thing. But yeah, those things are just revenue generation. You know, when they place them at the bottom of hills and all that type of stuff, that's just highway robbery.
Yeah, it certainly is. And Dan makes a good point. He's noticed that bus drivers burn right through red lights because the bus is not in their name. Yes, because we don't have that. That's funny. The American cameras snap your plate and your face because they have to prove who was behind the wheel. But the Canadian cameras only snap the plate. So you buzz through and you can actually fight that one in court. Yeah. And just for those who don't know, in the city of Calgary, if you do get one of these photo radar tickets, there's 3 different places that I know where they are. 16th Ave is a really bad place for that. Fight them, and typically they'll drop them 2 days before your trial. Fight all of them in court. Take them all to court. They drop them because they know they don't have a leg to stand on. It is absolutely ridiculous. I'm just going to shoot back over to the Rumble room here. Hold on. Get Set is asking, should we actually repay the CERB or the CRB debt that's brought forward? And I'm going to answer that one saying no, get a hold of me. But Rob, what are your thoughts on the emergencies, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, CERB, during COVID, the fake pandemic? Go ahead.
I think this is kind of a matter of personal conviction type of thing. But I would say this. I think that CERB or a universal income or a guaranteed income or sometimes a lot of this stuff with cryptocurrencies, etc. I think a lot of this stuff was conditioning people for the idea that, you know, government was this, you know, cradle to grave welfare system like they would have in Scandinavia or something, you know, in the 70s. And beware all that stuff, folks, because all that was entrapment, right? It was conditioning you to the idea that, you know, Big Brother was going to look after you, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But then you owed Big Brother, you know, your privacy in return. And so I think a lot of this stuff was conditioning. So I never took any CERB money. I know, like, I used to work at the National Citizens Coalition with David Somerville. And we always maintained that we never wanted to accept a dime of government handout because, you know, it doesn't matter if it's schools or it's CERB or what have you. As soon as you start taking government money, you're beholden to their rules. And if they want you to promote a trans agenda or, you know, comply with, you know, the privacy restrictions or, you know, mandatorily have an app or whatever it is, you know, you're on the hook. So I'm very much an individualist. I think Wyoming is the most beautiful place in North America. I just want the smallest government. I don't need a massive venue, you know, to go and see, you know, some artists that are defaming, you know, the family or something like that, and charge big tax dollars for it to create it and build it and sustain it and maintain it. I'm all about small government. The smaller, the better.
Yeah, I certainly do agree with that. And for those who are right now emailing me on my website, I'll be addressing everyone's questions tomorrow morning. I'm getting up bright and early to answer all of those emails. Don't worry, I will reply to everybody who is reaching out on the show. Richard, is it? Yeah, Richard, thank you very much for buying 3 tickets. The pot is now at $300 for tonight. Someone's going to get 150 smackers, and the Canadian dollar still has a little bit of buying power. So it's not a bad thing, everyone. We're going to do the draw in 15 minutes. So anybody who would like to buy their tickets, head over to my website right now, hit the shop button. You'll see the 50-50 draw there. Grab tickets because that's a lot of cheddar. There you go. All right, Rob. China has the facial recognition system. They have the social credit score. If you buy too much liquor, you lose points. If you swear or spit, you lose points. If you cross against the lights, you lose points. Did you see now in China that your bank account is now connected to your handprint, and you hover your hand over top of a scanner? Boop, it's zapping you for, like this kid bought a Coke. There's a little bottle of Coke and beep, scanned his hand. I couldn't believe it. No. So my thoughts are, don't sign up for this. But you having worked in Parliament, was this ever something that was actually discussed in Parliament by any branch of government, bringing in the handprint or the eye scanner or whatever?
Well, I'll tell you what I saw post 9/11. Obviously, where the World Trade Center came down and Flight 93 and crashed in Pennsylvania, and et cetera, and Pentagon. There was a tremendous focus on security and counterterrorism. The entrances to Parliament Hill changed. I mean, all of a sudden, mirrors were going underneath our vehicles to see if there was, explosives, et cetera, blah, 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 sniffer dogs, whatever, all this type of stuff, right? So that changed. But also, as well, at some of the hotels around Ottawa, they would hold these soirees, these, things, these wine and dine events, where they were, in a sense, testing out these various technologies. I remember, I think it was the Arc Hotel, if memory serves me correctly, in downtown Ottawa. I used to stay there on occasion. And in the lobby, they had this thing all set up so that as soon as you walked in the room, it would track you by facial recognition. And it showed, that these cameras were tracking you through the entire room, who you talked to, et cetera, and, hundreds of people simultaneously type of thing to show you what it could do. And this was back in, it's 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. So that stuff was already being shown to us. And I already, had severe reservations about it. I remember I was told when I was on Operation Apollo, which was running grid patterns in the Arabian Sea on the HMCS Toronto, we were told that as the dhows, those small ships, were leaving, say, for example, the coasts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, heading over to the Horn of Africa, that we would be checking the ship's rosters to see if there was a change in the roster of sailors, occupants on board the ship, whether or not there was small arms, et cetera, and also facial recognition to see if there was some of the Al-Qaeda operatives that were recognizable. And now I was a little shocked when we pulled up along 3 dhows. There were 20 guys on each dhow. They pretended they didn't speak English, and then gratefully, took our granola bars and our, apples and oranges and our pop and everything else. And then they could speak English when it was time to hand out food and drink. But then our ship pulled away, and I didn't see any of the facial recognition software. No rosters were asked for. There was no check for small arms, etc. I was shocked, and I was kind of wondering what we were doing there. And the captain merely explained that, well, there was no large, tanks or armored personnel carriers on that, so we're not going to worry about it. But that indicated to me that supposedly at the time we had the ability to use facial recognition, the distance between the pupils, point of the nose, fringes of the mouth, to determine if some of these guys were senior Al-Qaeda operatives. I didn't see it used, but I was told that it was available.
And how long ago was that?
That was just post 9/11.
Yeah. So 2001.
It was a long time ago. Yeah, 20 years ago.
Scary thought. So imagine what they've got now.
Oh,
Dan's asking a question here. What about if you're legally on government medical disability? How much can they dictate the terms of your life to you? Oh, I think everything. We've seen all kinds of dictation to our lives from government at just about every single branch. I know, look, guys, when I was living in Calgary, I can tell you this. There's an area of Calgary called Forest Lawn. And in there are a lot of prostitutes, and there are a lot of homeless, and there's a lot of people just down on their luck, a lot. And at the time, as a journalist, I was asking all of them questions about what government plans they were on, what government programs were there to assist, and how easy or difficult it was to maintain them. And to be on welfare, it's called Alberta Works in Alberta, you had to jump through about 9 to 10 different hoops, and you had to call in every month and let them know that your financial status hadn't changed and that you didn't have a job, but you had to also say that you were looking for a job. Even if you're homeless, you don't have any way to write a resume, you still have to tell them, yes, I'm looking for work, or you don't get your next check. Now, where most rents in Calgary are $2,000 a month, all you get is $900 bucks Canadian, sometimes less. So how could you possibly live off that? And Dan, these folks who had nothing, like they were living under bridges, literally, had to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to keep their dough. And a lot of them were on prepaid phone cards with their phones. And if another homeless guy stole their phone, well, now they can't even communicate to get their money. It's a really bad scene. What are your thoughts there, Rob? Go ahead.
Well, I would say, like, we've seen a tremendous expansion of euthanasia in Canada. This medical assistance in dying, I mean, it's ridiculous. Now it's being offered to veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, people that don't have terminally ill, circumstances like cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say that I would not be surprised, given what I've seen out of this government, that they would start encouraging, pressuring, suggesting to people that are on medical disability that they investigate, think about, consider, whatever the hell you want to call it, medical assistance in dying, because we've seen it with veterans and all sorts of other people that are in non-terminal situations. It's sad. It's a culture of death, and so I don't for a second put Justin Trudeau and some of those folks beyond that. I think it's a culture of death, and I wouldn't be shocked if they do that at all.
No, I wouldn't be shocked one bit at all. So, I mean, if you are involved with any government program, when the Canadian dollar just goes away and everything's on central bank digital currency, they're going to dictate the terms of your entire life to you. And that's really sad. And it will probably get to the point, everybody, where they ration how many liters of gasoline that you can buy, because they'd rather have you in electric vehicles that the grid can't handle so they can shut your car off if you don't do what you're told. My recommendation: find cars built from 1975 and older and put those on the road. All right. Because there's no way to get a GPS system integrated into the car to shut down the brakes or shut down the engine or whatever it might be. All right. They could track you by gluing something on the car, but they're not going to shut the car down. There we go. Just wanted to let everyone know here that we had Tina. Thanks for grabbing a ticket. And Mark, thanks for grabbing a ticket. So the pot is now at $320. And I'll be drawing a winner in about 7 minutes. There you go, everyone. $320 is the pot. So someone's going to get half of that at the end of the show. And I will be phoning whoever wins if you've left your phone number in your email. If not, please do. And I'll call you immediately after the show. So to recap, this conversation we've had tonight, about 2.5 weeks ago, you and I talked about the banking system was going to be shut down essentially through Trudeau's inaction. Trudeau wants chaos. Obviously, he wants chaos. He wants the banking system shut down so you don't have any money. At the same time, there will be 1 million blacks and Arabs coming into Canada from countries that hate us. There was 1.14 million that came in last year. That's 2.14 million people with no skill set who are all going to be on government assistance with nowhere to live and no jobs. So you're going to have that chaos along with no money. Rob, how bad are things about to become? That's what I need to ask you.
Well, I mean, obviously what Trudeau is doing in terms of immigration is he's just vote buying, right? Like he's looking at demographics and saying, who can I let in that I think is going to vote Liberal? Like it's just that crass. His father wasn't beyond that. When Pierre Elliott Trudeau got elected in '68, they did slightly better in Toronto than they thought they were going to do. And so he did a post-mortem on that, and they figured out that it was the recent immigrants that tipped the balance, because Toronto before that had largely been kind of the Tories. The joke was that the Anglican Church was the Tory party at prayer, was Toronto the good, all that type of stuff. And because he did better there in 68, he figured out who the demographics were that changed Toronto, that gave him some of the seats he wasn't anticipating. And then he got rid of a lot of the immigration controls that had been in place in the past to not radically alter the demographic makeup of the country. And Lloyd Axworthy, for example, was one of those young liberals who was a closet, communist sympathizer, etc. He wanted more and more and more of that because he saw them as liberal voters, etc., and obviously substantially changed his riding in the face of Winnipeg in doing so. Monty Solberg, when Monty Solberg was a critic of the Chrétien government, the Martin government, did a very good job of poking fun at them in question period. They made sure to target the biggest city in his riding, which was Brooks. There was a meatpacking plant there, and they brought in as many people as they could to try to alter the demographics of Brooks to mess things up, if you will, in Monty's backyard. So they're not beyond that type of thing, and they're experimenting with the whole country just to be able to bring people in that they think are going to be voters for them.
Yeah, but the big problem is that they don't have anywhere to live and have no jobs and don't speak the language and are coming from excessively violent cultures. So what does that part of this equation mean for the average Canadian?
Sure. Yeah, well, if people come from an area where it's perfectly normal for 12 and 14-year-old boys to carry around AK-47s and to kill somebody because they disagree with their friends or something like that because they're child soldiers, don't expect that behavior is going to change overnight coming to Canada. So the more that you take in people from some of those backgrounds, and especially with all the financial strains that we're talking about with central bank digital currency, a credit crash, printing up $1 trillion, all this stuff that's live and real in the Canadian economy, a shortage of housing, high interest rates, all this type of stuff, it's going to create social lack of cohesion. And I mean, you look at what happened in Germany, for example. They had women were getting raped in Cologne on New Year's Eve, etc. The Germans have had to fundamentally, hopefully, rethink what they're doing in terms of their immigration policies. Geert Wilders was just elected in the Netherlands. Pim Fortuyn, who preceded him, was assassinated. And then, therefore, they guarded Geert Wilders with the 24/7 security type of thing, and he's now the leader of that country. But there's serious issues. Demographics is destiny, and so you got to be very careful. When the Harper government was in, they tried to cut back on some of the numbers of immigration to allow for better integration. And one of the thoughts was that, we would let more students in because students come in young, able-bodied, with tremendous, intellectual potential, and would therefore contribute over a whole lifetime into the healthcare or pension systems, et cetera, before collecting. Unfortunately, what's wound up happening is that foreign governments wanting to get their intelligence agents into the country have falsified documents, taking 30-some-year-old people, trying to portray them as teenagers or in their 20s to study here, to get access to Canada and to subvert, Canadian democracy. So you got to be careful who you let in. It's like having a family. Everybody wants to get in, type of thing. But once you're in, you got to determine, what do you want to see this country become? And if they're just being imported for the crass idea of vote buying, that's trouble.
Yeah, immensely. Okay, everybody, that's it. No more tickets. No more tickets. There's $330 that's going to be won by someone tonight. So let's just scramble the names here a little bit. There we go. Move it all around. Nobody and here. Nobody can accuse me of peeking. I'm going to do this on top of my head here, and I've got one. Here we are, and there we go. Chris McGowan. So Chris McGowan. There we go, Chris. There we go. There's the winner, Chris McGowan. Chris, You did not give me a phone number in your email, so could you please email me your phone number right now? I'm going to call you right after the show, and I'm going to find out which email address you'd like me to send your prize money to. So congratulations for winning half of $330 tonight. That's just awesome. Oh, yeah, fantastic. Thank you to everybody who participated. Remember, this show does not get a penny from the government. In fact, the government just keeps taking pennies away from this show. So we do appreciate all of your support. Rob, in our last 10 minutes here, I just wanted to reassure everybody that we're not telling Canadians this so that they'll panic. And we're not telling Americans this so that they're going to panic as well, because we know that there will be spillover of Canadian chaos with a collapsed banking system into the United States. And we know that the Australian government might follow suit with this. We don't want you to panic. But Rob, as a guy who's in Calgary right now, what would you tell the average Canadian to start doing today and to start preparing for between now and June 30th of next year? Please go ahead.
Well, if you've got money, protect it. I mean, you've been told here what their intentions are. Don't trust that somehow, this can't happen in Canada. I mean, it's already been put down in black and white, whether it's the studies or the changes, the amendments to the Bank Act, etc. This stuff's coming, folks. They're trying to do it. They really are. More and more banks are taking this on. So what I would suggest is, if you have financial instruments, whether it's credit cards or it's bank accounts or it's mortgages or it's investments, if you can put them in a provincially regulated financial institution out of the hands of Justin Trudeau, you're better off. You really are. Now, in some provinces, I don't trust them more than I trust Trudeau, but I'm lucky that I'm in Alberta. I think I prefer Danielle Smith and trust her more than I do Justin Trudeau. So if you can, reposition that stuff. Also, as well, let's face it, folks, there's going to be some banks that aren't going to be well prepared. If there is a credit crunch, if there is a CBDC ripple effect in the marketplace, etc. We had some banks that only survived during the Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, AIG subprime crisis because the Bank of Canada bought some bad debt off of their sheets and then sold it back on the market later. So take account of that. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in the United States, not the same as it used to be. Now, no longer bailouts, bail-ins, so people could lose money. If you're in some of those banks that are borderline insolvent, the government's not going to step in to bail those suckers out. It's going to be you and your money and your deposits that'll bail them out, bail them in, whatever you want to call that. So there's things you can do, folks. Pay for things in cash, and you might want to start buying some gold and silver.
Gold and silver, yeah. And if you can, collectively as a family, this is the thing. Everyone says, I can never buy a house. Well, that might be true as an individual, but are you not able to sign really solid contracts with family members to say, yeah, we're all going to invest in one numbered corporation and we're all going to collectively own it at an equal share and buy a house under that? That's something that we're doing here in Costa Rica, Rob, is that some people can't afford a house down here. Like, a lot of the houses are about 500,000 US. Now they're nice places, pool, high ceilings, really nice tile floor and whatnot. But if you get 5 different people with 100 grand US, we get them into a corporation and they all own 1/5. When that house is rented out, they get 1/5 of the revenue each month. And then when the house is sold, they all get 1/5 of the profit. They get their money back plus the profit. So we have to start utilizing real estate as a way to make money collectively. It's legal. We can do it. It's just a matter of cooperation, and your contract has to be written by a lawyer and has to be solid, and you should get your own lawyer to look at it too. But these are things that we can do to protect our money. All right, so we are just about out of time here. What are your concluding statements on Trudeau crashing the banks next year?
Take him at his word, folks. Don't believe that he's your best friend. He's written this in specifically for June 30th so that he has the most amount of time, all of July, all of August, probably most of September, to do whatever he wants without parliamentary scrutiny. He chose that date for a reason. Take him at his word. He's up to no good. And I don't know if we're going to have a chance to defeat him with an election before that, but do not trust this guy.
There's no reason for him to call an election prior to October of next year when the law says it has to happen at all. So why would he? Get it out of your head, everybody, that he's calling an election, because if he calls an election earlier, then he can't pull this stunt of crushing the banks. Right. So, and I agree with Rob. Go to private institutions if you have to. And if you need to, move your money to Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico. The Republican states are still good places to open bank accounts up. Florida has homestead law. That's what you were alluding to earlier in the show. Homestead law in Florida says you can buy a house and nobody can take it from you. So whenever you see millionaires and billionaires buying lots of houses in Florida, they know that litigation is coming. So they buy properties in Florida that they know homestead law is going to protect. Why not look into the laws of various states and regions that are outside of where you are? And Rob, that's what I'm doing for people now. I'm scouting the Caribbean. I'm talking to a lot of lawyers down here and a lot of millionaires, and they're all saying the same thing, that your money is going to be safer in Panama, Costa Rica, even this new president they have in Barbados. She's a little crazy, but her banks are secure. So these are things to look at, everybody. And I'll be scouting all of that for you. So over the course of the next 5-6 months, I will have answers as well. Rob, we got to do this again, because
it's always fun.
I only asked like 5 or 6 questions. I had about 40 up here that we had to get through. I think we're doing a part 3 soon, aren't we?
Sounds good to me. You bet. Sure.
All right. If people want to find you on social media, where do they do that, Rob?
We've actually got our petition to reject central bank digital currency, and it's up on our Firearms Institute for Rational Education website. I'll be sending that around, the link to the people who I have on email. Please circulate that. We're going to be presenting those to some of the MLAs and the MPs, hoping for changes with regard to the Alberta regulations and what have you. So we sure could use the help.
Fantastic. Well, Rob, you get that newsletter to me, and I'll make sure I get that out to my newsletter as well. Rob Anders, everybody, former member of Parliament, guy who stood toe-to-toe with Justin Trudeau. Thank you for being here tonight. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. I love talking to this guy. I'll tell you why. Is because, yes, he held the political office of member of Parliament for 18 years, but he's the most down-to-earth guy who's in politics that I've ever met. And he did take the time when I was running for mayor of Calgary to sit me down and show me what politicians would wear for the best success and what they would say for the best success and how to even, stand and get your tie going for the best success. Just an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I really do appreciate that. And I want to remind you all that we did not bring any of this up tonight because we want you to panic. I don't want you to run around in fear, but I want you to know that there are a lot of bad things coming, like the CRA sending letters out to all of you, threatening you for cash that you don't owe, like CERB, corporate tax, income tax, all these things. They're doing it to try to weaken your resolve. Don't let them do it. Get stronger in your households. Keep your families together. Don't argue with your families. That is what they want you to do. Do not fear the CRA and the government, because they're just mammals like you and me. And they have their own weaknesses and fears. And believe me, they know they're in the wrong. So they're more afraid of what's going on in the world than we are. Wow. Be vigilant, protect your assets, protect your family, and be strong, because we all need to be exactly that at this exact time. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show that runs every single Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I love you all. Thank you for being here. And